Good morning, you guys. I'm not sure where everyone is this morning, but it's still dark outside here, and drinking out of a Stevie Wonder mug that says, "Don't be a lady, be a legend." And I think that's the invitation to all of us today and always, really. But thank you for getting up early on a Saturday morning. I was telling Emma that we had a spontaneous team party last night here in our backyard, and to have everyone together again in person was absolutely amazing. And we had a lot of games going on in the backyard, and anybody that lost had to go down the slide, which is made for little kid butts. But it was so much fun to have people together, and it's so much fun to get up with all of you this morning. We really are standing at this powerful intersection, and I think especially as women, we hold the incredible skills and keys and resources to move this forward. So I can't think of a more powerful group of people to be speaking with and spending Saturday morning with. But where we are today is inheriting a crazy opportunity disguised as an absolutely terrible problem. The health of our children is in crisis. And, when you really look at the data about what has happened to American children, it is heartbreaking and at times incredibly paralyzing. 1 in 3 children now has what is called the 4 A's: allergies, ADHD, autism, and asthma. 1 in 3. And 1 in 2 kids born in the year 2000, which is my oldest child's class. So the kids that are now 21, 1 in 2 of those children are expected to be insulin dependent by the time they reach adulthood. You start layering on statistics around diabetes, you start layering on statistics about obesity, and it's clear that this generation of children is in crisis. But the statistic that really moved me to action more than anything was the fact that in the United States, the rates of pediatric cancer have escalated to just incredible proportions. And cancer is the leading cause of death by disease in American kids under the age of 15. When I read that, I remember standing at the park with my 4 kids and thinking, oh my gosh, what do we do? And all of the headlines in the newspapers were around obesity. And I thought, if cancer is the leading cause of death by disease in our children, what can we do? Because they've done nothing to inherit a statistic like that. And yet here we are as their mothers, standing in front of them, with an opportunity to actually try to fix this. And so as I was pulling all this different data, and especially around pediatric cancers, I was actually pretty grateful because the president's cancer panel, which was assembled under the Bush administration, and then the report was released under the Obama administration, really was speaking to, do what you can to reduce your children's exposure to these environmental toxins. And I thought, I'm grateful for this report because it had been constructed under a conservative administration and then released under a more liberal administration. And I thought, cancer doesn't care if we're a Republican or a Democrat. It doesn't care what side of the aisle we're on. Our kids don't care. And so, what can we be doing to drive this forward? And so it began a lot of very courageous work on my part. I grew up in a conservative family in Houston, Texas. I was not in any way involved in activism. I was not in any way involved in environmentalism. Houston is a city, still is way behind the times in terms of, making the community environmentally aware. And so all of a sudden, I'm standing there thinking, I've got to learn how to do a lot of these things. And paralysis just wasn't an option. I can remember standing at the kitchen sink, looking at the kids in the backyard and thinking, how am I going to be brave enough to start to talk about these issues that people are really going to look at me and think, what is she saying? And especially, 15 years ago, when we were first starting to talk about things like genetically engineered ingredients, it was, people kind of looked at you like you had 3 heads, And so I thought, how in the world am I going to be able to present this in a way that is understandable for people, digestible for people, believable for people? And I really did lean into the data. My background was in finance and investment. And I thought, I'm going to let these numbers tell their own story. And so that's really where I started was, we as a generation have inherited just this massive change. And not only had our children earned this title of Generation RX because of all of these conditions and all of these statistics, which was just heartbreaking to me, but we had also inherited a food system that had gone through radical and rapid change over the last 20 to 30 years. And I was going to say, okay, let's just look at the data here. And thankfully, the The USDA was showing us the data of the adoption of genetically engineered crops. You know, the USDA was showing us the data of just the skyrocketing application of things like Roundup. And, you know, as I began to communicate on this, I realized like this is hard for people to hear. And it was hard for me to learn because there were nights where I would sit there in the bedroom of my youngest child, holding her, feeding her a bottle and thinking, you know, how did we not know this? How were we not informed of these just massive changes that had gone into the food system when other countries around the world were labeling genetically engineered ingredients, when countries like France and New Zealand weren't even allowing them planted in their soil. And I thought, how do I tell this story? And so, you know, again, it was sort of like to step back and say, can I study these different people? And as I did look at different authors and different voices that were in the food world, you know, 10 and 15 years ago, most of them were using fear to try to motivate people. And I don't know about you guys, but like when I hear somebody sort of like coming at me with a fear story, it made me want to shut down. And I thought, you know, I can't afford for people to shut down. As a mother of four, I can't do this by myself. So whatever I communicate has to be told in a way that people want to participate and they want to join in this effort to really, you know, build a better and smarter and safer food system. And so I studied Martin Luther King because I thought, you know, here he was during the civil rights movement, which clearly is still ongoing today. And he used love to motivate and inspire people into action. And I thought, like, I can, you know, that to me as a mother comes in spades. And so I thought, okay, I'll use love and not fear. And that can be this expansive outward energy. And then I studied Harvey Milk, who had also crusaded and spoken to gay rights. And it was so controversial when he did, but then he used gratitude. And I thought, okay, well, I can use love and I can use gratitude, and those will be the two levers. And it truly, truly opened up an enormous world of opportunity in this work. The more that I learned about how we are as a country and the way that we have constructed a food system that no longer serves us, was really, you know, again, this chapter, this story that just continued to unfold. To learn that 85% of us are now choosing something organic, in spite of the extraordinary price points there, was really a pretty remarkable statistic. 75% of grocery store categories now carry something organic, but only 1% of our farmland is organic. And when I learned that, I was like, this is nuts. This is nuts for all of us. American farmers aren't growing what we want to eat. If you're CEO of General Mills, you can't access what your consumer wants to eat. And so I thought, you know, why aren't we getting right at this intersection so that we actually can turn our farmland into the food that American families actually want to eat? And that's when you start to look at policy and realize, wow, we've really constructed a system that has been designed to protect these entrenched interests, to protect these agrochemical guys, and not actually to protect all of us or to protect our farmers. And so as I really kind of started down that path, which is pretty heady, you know, I realized that here we are in the United States with our farmers carrying $426 billion in debt. And when a farmer is that in debt, they don't really have a lot of choice and opportunity to like get their head above water and transition to anything. It's just a matter of like, how do I keep putting food on the table? How do I keep, you know, affording to put my kids through college? And so as I was looking at that, I thought, you know, where is there an opportunity to really get at that intersection and think, how can we create an economic opportunity? How can we on-ramp a farmer into regenerative and organic agriculture? And so I was giving these keynotes back to back about 5 years ago to General Mills and to Nestle. And I said, you know, at this point, you guys, I said, you know what the consumer wants. And I said, but we're not growing it. We're not growing it. And so how can we get into that supply chain and blow open the bottleneck? And as you guys would know better than anyone, most of these food companies had no idea who their farmers are. And as I really started to sit down with some of these companies, you know, I would ask them, do you know the farmers in your supply chain? And on a Zoom call like this, I mean, you would get these blank stares and they would confess they know ADM and Cargill. And I thought, you know, this is an extraordinary opportunity to actually get in here and know your supply chain. And what was fascinating to me was that it really didn't matter what side of the aisle a food company was on. Some of the most progressive organic companies didn't know their farmers. And so as I began to work with these companies, there was a real opportunity for them to not only mitigate their own risk, because once you know your farmer, you know who you're working with and you can hear what their needs are. But there was also this incredible opportunity, because as more and more pressure was coming onto these companies to convert their supply chains for environmental reasons, because of all of the climate conversation, you need to know your farmer, and there needs to be enormous collaboration there. And so as we began to think about what we were doing at Replant, we thought, could we come in here and offer capital to farmers on terms that are completely aligned with what a farmer needs, and also enable us to capture these environmental ecological metrics. And so we tied capital to things like pollinator health, and we tied capital to things like water conservation and soil organic matter. And it became an extraordinary conversation, not only with the food companies and the brands, but also with the farmers. And I think that's the opportunity that's in front of us today, is to say, you know what, we have inherited a very broken food system. And the reason it is so broken is because we also have an extraordinarily broken and extractive financial system. And when you look at these two things, 70% of our farmers are male and 98% in the finance world are male. And as we talk about biodiversity and all of these things that matter to us so much, I thought you can't talk about biodiversity if we're not also talking about diversity. And so how do we elevate the voices of women, and how do we elevate the voices of farmers of color? Because when I've had those conversations, they get annoyed with us when we talk about regeneration. And they're like, you know what, we don't have to regenerate anything as a Black farmer, because we never had access to the capital that was used to fund genetically engineered crops and the portfolio of chemicals. So we only had to figure out how to farm through soil stewardship. So I think, that to me, I look at all of the opportunities we have to create that diversity in governance. And it's not just on farm, but it's really in every single organization that wraps around our food and agricultural systems. And when I talked to members of Congress, I had a call with Congressman Ryan in his office last week, and I thought, there's such an opportunity to educate. And they do actually hold a soil caucus. And I thought, how can we get these voices forward? How can we bring the voices of women and bring the voices of farmers of color forward into these conversations, because of the incredible knowledge and wisdom that we hold? And when I'm talking to growers who are in AB and Bev supply chain, these women say, the terms that I was offered for these loans were violating. And I thought, that's not a word in any way that we should be using when we talk about farming and agriculture and the nourishment and the things that we're bringing forward. So, I look at the opportunity in front of us today, and I think it is an absolutely extraordinary one. We stand at this powerful intersection now, we know, of food health and soil health and climate health. But I think the thing that is largely overlooked is the financial health of the farmer. And if that doesn't exist, we will lose our farm economy. We will transition to these towers of food that people are growing, and understandably, it brings nutrient security and food security into parts of the country that don't have access. But if we lose our farmers, that soil health and that climate security is lost too. And so the opportunity for all of us to educate people is extraordinary right now. And I think that's the invitation. When people first said, Robyn, you've got to start talking about this stuff. There are these genetically engineered ingredients that you've learned about. And, when I was first learning about these genetically engineered crops and the concern around allergenicity, I thought, I don't want to tell that story. And then to learn that one of the largest food allergy nonprofits was funded by Kraft and Monsanto at the time, I thought, I don't want to tell that story. But I remember thinking, what happens if we don't? What happens if we're not brave enough to step into this leadership? Will we be able to look ourselves in the mirror 10, 20, 30 years from now? And that really was, my moment of reflection, where I thought, I want to be able to look back and know that I did everything I could to try to build a better system, and to know that I can't do it by myself. None of us can do it by ourselves. But how do we come together and collaborate in a way that really moves this forward? And I think the voices of women are absolutely essential in this, because we, I think, have an intuition that is so powerful and so great in governing how we're looking at this. And I think we also tend to move through with less ego. And in that opportunity, it's to bring all of these voices around the table together and say, how do we create this? And I will speak a lot about how we have sort of this like internal dashboard. It's like the lights on the dashboard of a car. And when something's going wrong in the car, those lights, light up and they tell you, hey, pay attention over here. Internally, I think we have those same lights in that same dashboard. And that, to really pull that knowledge forward, to pull that wisdom forward. When I'm on farm, I'll ask different farmers in different communities, what are the leading conditions that you're seeing in your local hospitals? And in every community, they know. They know exactly what is the most prominent condition in that hospital. And then the women will pull in closer and they'll say, this is what I'm seeing in the grandchildren. This is what I'm seeing. And to me, the heartache is we can't, as a country, afford to feed our families the way that we want to. And that to me is criminal, because the resources are around the table.
Well,
and
the
way that our tax dollars are being allocated isn't aligned with how we want to actually move forward. And so if you think about like this opportunity to say, we as taxpayers, all of us together in uniform, those dollars are being used to subsidize this agrochemical model and the portfolio of chemicals that go with it. If we had the opportunity to check a box when we were sending things in to say, I actually want my tax dollars to be used to fund this regenerative and organic system, it would completely change the economics for all of us, for the consumer, for the farmer, and for the corporates that are partnering here. And so, as we continue this education, I think policy will follow the money. Some of the work that we're doing in the Central Valley in California to fund the transition of almond orchards to regenerative have shown a 500% increase in water infiltration on those orchards. If you're talking about that sizable increase in water infiltration, policy is going to follow the money. But again, I think we need more women in the ag secretary roles at the state level. Thankfully, in Colorado, we have our first female ag commissioner, but we also need more women in all levels of government across the state level. But I think, as these food companies really wake up to the opportunity that's in front of us, they're realizing that they can transition their supply chains. And we are so uniquely poised at this win-win intersection, because as they transition their supply chains, not only are they then now growing what the American consumer wants to eat, but they've got an incredible story to be able to tell about how it's impacting pollinator health and soil health and water conservation, and then farmer health. So, I look at that and think, as we talk about things like crop insurance, we're going through something right now with our team where we're talking about crop insurance. And I said, this is too narrow of a focus. And if we think about crop insurance as simply just insuring that one crop for that one cycle, and how expensive that is, not just with the dollars that we're spending, but with the lost opportunity to transition a farm to regenerative and organic. Instead of thinking about it as crop insurance, we should actually think about it as food security insurance. So what does food security insurance look like? It's water. It's making sure we've got water security on the farm. It's making sure that there's pollinator security on the farm. But I think the most important piece is to ensure the legacy of that farm. And when we talk to different growers and we say, as you transition to regenerative agriculture, what was the biggest benefit that you saw? My favorite answer is when someone said, my kids came back to the farm. Because that to me ultimately is food security, is when we can ensure that the next generation actually wants to farm the way that we are now farming. And so, you step into that and you think, where can we offer that opportunity? And I think it's got to be economically viable. And then we also have to have on-farm consultants who can help a farm transition off of this chemical input model into the soil stewardship model. And thankfully, that part really excites me because we've got so many amazing technical assistance companies and organizations that are emerging. And they are absolutely funded and inspired by so many younger people who are in their 20s and 30s. And I look at that and I just think, 10 years from now, we're going to look back on this and be like, wow, that was the beginning of an entire new sector for agriculture. But the opportunity is there. And as we continue to raise the funds to transition farmland, we're seeing interest literally around the world in the model that we've created. And part of it is because we're calling out these conventional lenders and saying, you know what, you guys are extractive. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't give a farmer or a rancher the capital they need to transition. And if it takes 3 to 5 years, I mean, in bank terms, that can feel like forever. And they just want to make sure that they're getting those returns on the debt all the time. And so the more that they have kept our farming community in debt, the higher the returns on that interest is coming back to the banks. And so for us, it was like, how can we get in there and say, here's a loan and we're going to be successful when you guys are not under us, when you guys have completely transitioned and you're free of that recurring debt level, because that really has been what strapped us into this broken model. So, I think if we look at it, we're at 1% of farmland is organic. Europe's got 8 to 10% of farmland is organic. Anheuser-Busch InBev has the 7th fastest growing beer in America, and it's their organic beer. We see the growth of organic across all of these different sectors and categories. And yet here we stand at 1% of our farmland. That's the opportunity to accelerate. And it's not some like, oh, let's go back to ancient days past. It's no, let's take this indigenous wisdom. Let's take this expertise and knowledge. Let's marry it with 21st century technology and our ability to capture data on farm. And let's really drive this forward. But I think it does require, I know it requires the voice of women, and we won't be successful until our voices are absolutely equally represented at the table, because we don't look for the quick fix. We look for the solution that will serve our children in the long term. And, for me, I don't think that there are enough voices yet in this space, that are really powerful, which is an enormous opportunity to create them. And to me, my hero is Jane Goodall. And I look to her and I think when she would have first started talking about her work with chimpanzees and monkeys and gorillas, people would have thought she was totally nuts, and when she was in her 20s and 30s, I mean, they would have thought like, what in the world with this woman? What is she talking about? And yet now we look at her and her elegance and her grace in her 80s and her ability to really stand before us with this concept that she brought to the world. And I think that's the opportunity. For people right now, they would say, you can't feed the world. This is nuts. You can't do this. This is nuts. I think impossible is just something that hasn't been done yet. And we have the opportunity to build this system. We have the opportunity to create it. And we stand at that powerful, powerful intersection. And so, I just think like as a team, which is what we are, and I look at us and I think, we are one team and we stand together with this opportunity. So I want to stop for a minute and see if there are any questions, because there's so much data that can wrap around us to support us. And it started for me with the health of our children, and then to realize, that we weren't growing and making foods that consumers wanted to eat. And so as I started that kind of work with these big companies, it took Nestle 7 years to create that chocolate chip that was organic and allergen free. It took them 7 years, so I thought like, we're a little bit like turning the Titanic here. It's going to take us a while. But I can't imagine working on anything more inspiring or more important. And as we continue to drive the transition, my goal and my hope would be that we see that impact not only in the acreage in the United States, but also in the health of our children. Because ultimately, how we treat the soil is how we treat our children. And the health of our children is the leading indicator for the health of our country. And so if we want to talk about national security, we have to talk about food security, and we have to talk about the health of our children, which is why you guys matter so much, so much. And I think however I can help elevate and support the voices that are around the table today, just please let me know. So I want to take the last few minutes and see if I can answer any questions.
Feel free to unmute or put something in the Zoom chat box, or if you're watching from Whova, the Whova chat box. Denise O'Brien brought up a great point about the use of Dicamba. As somebody who lives in Iowa as well and also works at Practical Farmers of Iowa, I see a lot of talk around pesticide drift, and Dicamba is a major issue. So I want to elevate that real quick.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we really are starting to understand how externalized these costs are. And as we test, organic crops, and we understand like how the drift has impacted these organic crops, I think, we're already standing in a place, especially this group this morning, where we're just like, this is insanity that we've done this. And it is. I mean, it's insane to think that somehow we don't share this one amazing home together, and that what we do over here is impacting us over here. I think there has to be legal accountability, and thankfully, with Roundup, we're starting to see the emergence of that. But again, we need women on boards, we need women in governance, we need women in office, so that we can really speak to this as a systemic, toxic problem that it is. I would invite any of you guys to think about running for some kind of local election. And I know that feels really radical, but there is that opportunity. There's opportunities at the USDA. Thankfully, there are people now inside at the USDA that understand what is happening and how we can work together. So, we've got to get involved in policy. And at first that felt really intimidating to me. And then I realized, when you go into these congressional offices, most of them are staffed by young, like 20-something-year-olds who are super passionate about these issues too. And use your voice for that. And, find a couple other friends that you can like link arms with and go in with, because we really do. We have to get involved in policy.
So Robyn, I would like to follow up on that. I ran for Secretary of Agriculture in 2006, and it wasn't because I was a woman that kept me back. It was because I was an organic farmer, and Farm Bureau did a nasty 72-hour before the election.
I can imagine. I can imagine.
Yeah. I was Karl Roved, is what people say, or swift boated. And but anyway, the disturbing thing about the Dicamba is that we're dealing with this on the Iowa Organics Board, and that is they're choosing, the tolerance level. It was of GMO. We went through the GMO tolerance level. Can you have 1% or no percent or 0.5%? And the Dicamba now, they can't tell where it comes from. So they're not doing anything about fines or anything. It's like, oh, we can't do anything about it, so we'll let it go. That's basically the attitude of our Department of Ag. Sorry.
Wow. So, yeah. And I mean, I think that's why they never label GMOs, because if you can't have traceability and accountability, you don't have liability. So you need traceability, accountability for liability. And so I can imagine they're not even probably trying to track it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I appreciate everything you're doing in that, and having been someone involved with this for many, many years. Fortunately, this we have in Iowa, and in fact, in my district, a woman who's a member of the Ag Committee and Finance, and Cindy Axney is her name. And she's been to my farm. I have close contact with her. And so I'm optimistic that we'll have, and I've talked to her about women coming to DC to do testimony when they start all the hearings and things about the Farm Bill, because that's where I first jumped into this stuff. And it really, it does. So we're going to work on it from Iowa.
Yeah, so, you know how I'm sure you guys have heard there's something Emily's List, where it's like women that are running for office, and it helps support women that are running for office. The concept I have, and maybe we do this together, it'd be a pretty cool legacy for all of us, is Rachel's List, and tabling Rachel Carson thinking women into these positions, because I think they're able to swift boat you if you're the only one. But imagine if there were in every state there were women as a chorus, as a choir singing this together, because then it's like, wait, what? It's not just her. It's actually like across the country, these women are rising up and saying, this is not okay. And so in my mind, I hold this vision for Rachel's List.
Go
And
for it.
it's tabling women into these positions, because I think you're right. It's like it is. And I was so early on and so out in front, and they tried to destroy me, and they tried to, marginalize and criticize and all these things in the comments, and I'd go on into the media, or I was supposed to be scheduled in the media, and it would be like in the 11th hour, just completely cut. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. But it also was very empowering, because I thought, this is what the truth does to them. It is this challenging. You experienced it, it is that challenging to them that they would literally orchestrate a 72-hour campaign against you. And so once you can expose that, and I think once we can expose it as, oh, it's not just me, it's not just you, then all of a sudden you rise up and over it together. And I think that really is the opportunity, is Rachel's List,
I like that. Go for it.
Definitely. I wish we had more time. I'm sorry that we ran over. I want to give everybody the opportunity to go get to the keynote as well. But thank you, Robyn.
Thanks so much for joining me, you guys, this morning. And Emma, I'm glad the sun came up on you.
Yes.
Thanks, you
Almost
guys.
coming up here. Thank you. And
Bye.
Robyn, maybe we can follow up. This is Jules, the executive director of WFAN, and I would love to follow up with you on that idea for Rachel's List, perhaps incorporating it into our Plate to Politics.
Yes, let's do. I mean,
program.
I've thought about it for a long time, but I would need a partner to do it. So
Yeah.
yes.
That would be great.
Thank you.
All
Okay.
right. We'll talk
Bye.
soon. All right. Bye-bye.